After 3 great episodes and half of a show behind us, will the 4th episode be able to keep up the high quality? And with Loki and Sylvie facing certain death, how will they pull off their survival? Hi there, it's Micha. Let's check it out together and see how they did it. Let's jump right into the synopsis. The episode starts with Sylvie's backstory. We see her as a young child playing in Asgard, when a young Ravonna Renslayer, back then still being a hunter, appears in Sylvie's room with some other Minutemen and just take the little girl. After being processed, the frightened child manages to steal Ravonna's time pad and just takes off. Back in the present, Ravonna is summoned by the Timekeepers, who pressures her to get things finally done, meaning finding the 2 variants and bring them in front of the Timekeepers. The chaos that Sylvie created on the sacred timeline is apparently already been fixed, so Mobius is busy trying to figure out where Loki and Sylvie might be hiding. Those 2, while facing certain death, are opening up to each other, even ending up holding hands, which creates a spike on the sacred timeline. A spike so steep that it shows up even seconds before the apocalypse comes to terms. This way, Mobius and the Minutemen are able to capture them both just seconds before they would have died. Loki tells Mobius that they have all been lied to, that they were not created by the Timekeepers, but that they are all variants whose memories were erased. Mobius initially doesn't buy that and puts Loki into a time cell, some kind of a private prison, where he is forced to relive one particularly painful moment with Lady Sith in a time loop. Of course, curiosity gets the better of Mobius, and after a talk with Ravonna, where he learns that Hunter C20 had died, even though he remembered that she was getting better, and after Ravonna explicitly forbids him to interview Sylvie, he switches his timepad device with hers. Meanwhile, Hunter B15, who was also previously enchanted by Sylvie, starts to remember bits of her life from before she was a Minuteman. So she decides to talk to Sylvie, who shows her a little bit more, making her decide to join forces with the variant. On Ravonna's device, Mobius finds a video where Hunter C20 is interviewed, speaking about her previous life that she also remembered, which lets Mobius know that she was apparently killed off for that. This leads to Mobius teaming up with Loki to bring down the TVA, but Ravonna already noticed the switched timepad device, and in a terrible twist, she has Mobius pruned. Next, Ravonna brings the 2 variants in front of the Timekeepers, who immediately ask for the 2 of them to be deleted. But Hunter B15 comes to the rescue and releases both of their neck collars, allowing them to fight for their life. A fight that they ultimately win, which leads to Sylvie beheading one of the Timekeepers, which turns out to be just a mindless android. While Loki tries to formulate his feelings for Sylvie, an unseen Ravonna prunes him from behind. The episode ends with Sylvie overpowering Ravonna, asking her to tell her all. In this show's first mid-credit sequence, we see that the Loki variant actually survived, waking up in a post-apocalyptic landscape that appears to be New York. Lying on the ground and looking up, he finds himself in the presence of 4 more Loki variants, offering their help to him. Wow, this was really one wild ride of an episode. Like the previous, it really delivers on the story aspects, had great writing, the acting again was superb, and on top of that, you got these great emotional twists that shocked the audience so deeply. I'm still a little bit impacted by it, to be honest. I mean, seeing Mobius being pruned and then seeing the same going on with Loki, that was so shocking, and at those seconds I was almost convinced that this is the end of it. But as the mid-credits sequence shows, Loki is still alive, so maybe this pruning means to be transported to a different space, to a different location and not being killed at all? If that is so, then maybe we can see Mobius waiting there as well. But that is at this point of course just a theory, because maybe just Loki survived by some twist of fate. But we will find out in one of the next episodes. There were quite a few revelations in this episode, like finding out that Mobius actually was considering Loki to be a friend. which I guess surprised Loki the most, which I hope will play out a little bit further in the future as well, hoping that this is not Mobius's end. We also learn that the time really works differently in the TVA, because Ravonna, even though I mentioned her to be a young Ravonna Renslayer back when she was still a hunter, appeared to be looking exactly the same age as she is now as a judge. And we also learned a little bit more about the current state of our Loki variant, regarding the question if he can be trusted and if he can already be considered one of the good guys. Because this episode does not only make a big shift in making Sylvie instantly the good guy and the TVA the bad guys, quite more quickly as I would have expected it, but also concentrates on showing Loki's inner state, being really shocked by Mobius's death, shedding a tear for that, which is a similar reaction that he had just a few moments before when he thought that Sylvie had been eliminated as well, where he was not able to hide his real emotions by also having tears in his eyes. I especially enjoyed the moment where he comes face to face with Lady Sith again in the time cell, admitting to her after a few loops that he is a narcissist, that he craves attention, that he is just mean to her because he feels alone, because he wants to be seen, and doing those pranks is the only way he sees to get that attention. And a quick side note here, I think it's a really fantastic idea to bring in Lady Sith in this episode and in this show, because not only has it been quite a while since we last seen her, but also, as you might remember from our previous videos, there was that big rumor that the female variant of Loki is Lady Loki, and Lady Loki was basically created by sending back Loki's spirit through time into the body of Lady Sith, which I guess is a nice nod to that theory, even if it doesn't seem to play out as being correct. Nice little bit of fan service. This sequence also touches on the big issue that Loki seems to be always alone. And as Lady Sith says, he also always will be alone. Something that is quite depressing and raises the question if the big spike that happened when Loki and Sylvie held hands was because they started to get romantically entangled? Or was it just because they both didn't felt alone anymore, having found someone who has a similar frame of reference, who was going through similar things in life, someone to relate to, someone, to repeat myself, who made both of them not feel alone anymore? Maybe that was the big thing that created the spike, but let's talk about that later. I also really liked the title, The Nexus Event, which I thought when I started to watch the episode was referring to the big chaos that Sylvie created by sending back some time charges throughout time, which I thought would be one of the main topics to see how that plays out. But apparently that has already been fixed. Instead of being completely complicated, as Ryan from the pitch meeting videos on YouTube would say, was super easy, barely an inconvenience. So I guess they just deployed some teams at the same time, trying to fix all that chaos that those time charges were creating, and that was the end of it. Pretty standard work for them, but just a lot of stress because it all happened at once. And at the end of the day that would make sense, because Sylvie's plan was to create chaos so that she could get into the TVA and confront the timekeepers. That was the plan all along and nothing more, so that seems to be a pretty straightforward explanation here. Therefore, this is nothing I would count against this episode. I think that explains it pretty well. So as it appears, the title is not referencing that. So what is the Nexus event? It still refers to two different things actually. First of all, the Nexus event that led to a young Sylvie being captured by the TVA, as well as the Nexus event that was created by Sylvie and Loki holding hands, where it spiked like crazy. The only thing that slightly bothered me this week was that Mobius was getting from being completely on the side of the timekeepers to directly jumping to burn it all down. Which might be a fair reaction, all things considered, but I think with what he knew at that point in time, he should still have had some doubts or at least try to figure out more before jumping to dismantling the whole thing. But that is a very small caveat. That all being said, I really enjoyed that episode, and I think it was the strongest one yet. I especially liked it for the emotional twist that they had in store for us, and like I said before, are still haunting me a little bit. I like it when they play on our emotions, especially when it ultimately has a good outcome, which we saw in the mid-credit sequence. That hopefully means that everyone who ever was pruned has ended up being still alive but teleported to a different place, like we see with Loki. That all being said, of course this episode needs to be rated higher than the previous ones. And I will do so by giving it 9.5 out of 10 points. The only small caveat from keeping me to give that episode the full 10 points is pretty much what I mentioned before, the fact that Mobius was just too quickly jumping on destroying it all. Which, by the way, could also be said about Hunter B15, but at least she was shown her previous life, which pretty much explained her quick turnaround well enough. Now let's have a quick look at the theory front. As mentioned before, I really want to revisit the idea of what created that big spike when both of them held hands. Obviously, we know that Mobius said that Loki is so self-involved, so narcissistic, that he fell for himself, that he has a romantical interest in his female variant, which in his words would create total chaos. I'm not 100% sure if that is actually the case, but as I discussed with my sister in the last Serious Talk video, they might come up with an idea to explain that they are not really the same person, not really a variant of each other, so that they can actually do that, because honestly it looked a little bit like Loki was falling for her. But what I can say for sure is that with her, he doesn't have that feeling of being completely alone. And it seems to be the same with her. So maybe that was what created the spike. And that might mean that a Loki variant that is happy might be something that the Timekeepers don't want. There is a theory out there that in the comics, Loki needed to be evil to basically be the catalyst for a lot of things, like the Avengers being created. They would not have assembled without him being the villain. But also different things might be happening just because he is doing villainous stuff. So maybe him turning away from being a villain and trying to be the good guy is something that is not wanted, and therefore he is not allowed to not feel alone, not allowed to fall in love with someone, not allowed to be happy, whatever you want to call it. So that might be really something to think about. Another one to think about is, was Ravonna on it all? Or was she also just a puppet playing along, being the in-between between whoever controlled the Timekeeper androids? Or maybe was she even aware of the fact that they were not real? At the beginning of the episode, when she was first talking to the Timekeepers, that was the impression I got, that she really believed she was talking with the Timekeepers. Though she didn't seem to be that shocked after one of them got beheaded and turned out to be a robot. So the other way around might be true, especially since the last scene was Sylvie demanding from her to tell her everything, which would suggest that she knows more than that. But maybe she just knows little pieces of the puzzle and has no idea that the Timekeepers were not real and that someone else was pulling the strings behind the scenes. One thing we can pretty much know for sure is, since time moves differently and she doesn't seem to have been aging since taking in Sylvie, that she very likely has not forgotten what Sylvie's Nexus event was that led to her being taken in as a child. Especially since she was smirking like hell behind their backs, which is never a sign of being a good person. And that is one of the biggest secrets I guess they will reveal at the end of a show, because it didn't seem as if there was an immediate threat going off of her. And if it was only because she was born a female variant and because she just lived too long, then that would be a very crazy and cruel reason to remove her from the timeline, which would give Sylvie all the more reason to feel herself to be on the right side of the events, and the right side of justice, for that matter. One big thing that is going around in the internet right now is the theory that Ravonna was in on it all, working with someone called Kang, the Conqueror, a villain who is able to time travel and who is a frequent adversary to the Avengers and the whole Marvel universe in general. And I mean, being a time traveler would be a very good fit here, right? I will read up a little bit on him and might be able to give an update in the next video, as a nice little Easter egg. As Kang is presumed to show up in the next Ant-Man movie, this might be a setup for him to show his face there. We will see. In any case, I guess we need a little bit of an explanation why the Timekeepers, or the person behind them pulling the strings, would be interested in having the two variants being brought in front of them, just to ask them to be deleted there. Why not just kill them straight away? Was that just a story device again, because we needed to see the Timekeepers and they in front of them to kill them off? Or was there a real reason why they wanted to see them? Was there something they needed from them, maybe especially from Sylvie, that made them spare them? That is one of those things where you think, okay, maybe it's a little bit of a weakness in the screenplay, or it will be explained later on and will make perfect sense then. The big question on everyone's mind, of course, is just Loki alive, or is Mobius alive as well? And where did they end up? And who are those Loki variants we see in the end? From what we see in the background, it obviously seems to be New York City after a big apocalypse or a big invasion or whatever you want to say about that. So my theory here would be that the TVA with their pruning sticks is not actually able to erase someone at all, but just to send to a different place and time, which might be after an apocalypse, at a point in time that should not exist at all. And I'm saying that because by accident I called this scenario post-apocalyptic, which might be actually exactly true. Imagine how Sylvie was always hiding right before the apocalypse, because nothing she can do there would ever create a spike, as long as it is not holding hands with Loki, as we learned today. Let's say what we saw is a world where everyone was killed off and there's no one alive on Earth anymore. In a parallel universe that of course might happen. So imagine they sent everyone there because theoretically this place doesn't exist and should be completely empty. None of their filters or monitors would even look there. So people could exist there without anyone in the TVA ever noticing. While of course that might be something that could create chaos along the way if they do something that could impact the timeline, especially since the TVA then wouldn't be even aware of something happening there. They would just have to deal with the outcome later on. But of course that is just a theory, and they might still be hiding somewhere that is actually right before an apocalypse, like Sylvie did before. And they are trapped there, maybe even also being caught in a time loop, like Loki was before. We will find out. A few small callouts though regarding those variants that we see at the very end. One of them seems to be, as I read up in the internet, a version of him being dressed exactly like he is in the comics. That is the older guy played by Richard E. Grant, which is called Classic Loki in the credits, but is called Old Loki in the comics. You also see a crocodile wearing some kind of horns like Loki does. So this doesn't seem to be a pet at all, that seems to be also a variant of Loki. Just like the boy who is holding that crocodile, who apparently is a young version of Loki. The really fascinating thing though is, and at first I thought that might be a variant of Thor, but it also seems to be a Loki variant, who is standing there with Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and is apparently a black variant of Loki, which means that there is at least one variant of Loki who would be worthy taking up Thor's hammer, which is pretty cool. I really hope we see more of those guys, especially that hammer-wearing version. I will likely revisit those topics with my sister in the next video I do with her. And there we will also do a nice update on all the previous theories that we talked about, just to see where we stand with those. And because I don't want to bore you with that once here and then again in the next video. That's it for this week. Do you agree with my rating? Do you also think that is the strongest episode yet? And did you also enjoy the emotional roller coaster that it was? If so, let us know in the comments. If you feel differently, also share your thoughts with us in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it and share it with your friends. And why not subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any future video. Make sure to also hit the notification bell so that you get a heads up whenever a new video is posted. So much for now, hear you next time and thanks for listening!